In Arizona, a shipment of money vanished into the high desert, along with the 2 men hired to guard it. The FBI didn't know if the guards were participants or victims of an ambush. Answers lay somewhere in Arizona's vast Northwest Territory. FBI agents struggled to piece together scattered clues to reveal the truth.
In Arizona, an armored van loaded with cash failed to reach its destination. Authorities suspected an inside job. When the vehicle was recovered, with the drivers and the cash missing, those suspicions grew even more. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. This well-planned crime required extraordinary efforts to solve. The FBI knew that the smallest detail could make or break the case.
May 24th, 1977, Phoenix, Arizona. A security company transferred $333,000 in cash and coins from their vault to an armored van. 2 courier guards prepared for another day distributing cash to Arizona banks.
Y'all about ready to go?
We've got a problem with this door. I think we want to take a look at it. Let me see.
One guard discovered a problem with the van's side door latch. They would report to the company maintenance garage before they set out. This delay put Cecil Newkirk and Russell Dempsey an hour behind schedule. The day's route included stops from Phoenix, 150 miles north to Flagstaff.
This is van 26 to base.
With the delay, it would be difficult to make all the stops. Banks waited on the deliveries to provide cash to their customers.
Superior Later Security.
By 10:30 a.m., the security company received a call from a bank complaining they had not received their delivery.
Mechanical problems with the van, so we got a little late start. Well, they should be there shortly.
At first, the dispatcher thought the late start explained the problem.
Fine, we'll keep us informed. All right.
But throughout the afternoon, the dispatcher couldn't reach the guards.
Base Courier 1. Dempsey, you out there? This is Base. Come on in.
By 4:30, the company contacted the FBI. The Phoenix field office broadcast an APB for the armored van to all area police. State and local authorities used the remaining light of the evening to search for the missing van. They found no sign of it or the courier guards. Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth, now retired from the FBI's Phoenix field office, wondered if the guards had driven off with the money.
One of the first things that you do is certainly look at the drivers to see whether or not that might be a possibility as to what had happened, whether there's a driver involvement.
Both of the missing guards were married. That evening, an FBI agent interviewed each of their wives separately. They confirmed that neither of their husbands had financial problems that would provoke them to steal the money. Company officials agreed. Both guards had given 20 years of faithful service. The missing van's route covered a vast area of the state. Authorities had nearly 1,000 square miles to search, and most of that terrain was remote desert. The next day, Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopters retraced the guard's scheduled route. They flew up Interstate 17, north toward Flagstaff, checking all exits. Pilots spotted the van 50 miles north of Phoenix. It had been abandoned a quarter-mile off the interstate in a remote area near the town of Bumblebee. Arizona public safety officers and local deputies cordoned off the area before the FBI arrived. Agents approached the van cautiously. They did not want to disturb the footprints tracked around the vehicle. The armored van's doors were locked. From the outside, there was little to indicate what had occurred.
There didn't appear to be a struggle on the inside, but we had to actually get inside the vehicle before we could really conduct a thorough investigation or examination of the van. And it wasn't until later on that morning that they had brought a spare set of keys out and we effected entry into the van.
The radio was still on. Yet the base had not received any calls for help. The van's siren had not been tripped. A shotgun kept in the van for defense had not been fired, and its safety was still engaged. The guards had not used any of their resources to signal that there had been a robbery. In the back, agents found bags containing several $1,000s in coins, but $293,000 in paper currency was missing. Blood spatter on the carpet and money bags indicated someone had been injured, but agents didn't know who.
Your biggest fear at the time, of course, is for the safety of the guards. Money can always be replaced. Your life cannot. And so we were certainly concerned about the guards' fate.
Amongst the footprints in the dust, investigators noted a separate set of tire tracks behind the van. Evidence technicians captured the tire prints with photos and plaster casts. Agents concluded that it was unlikely the guards had been overpowered by a single perpetrator.
The location of the van, the condition of the van, and everything that we found at the scene just told us that this was a crime that had been well planned and probably had been committed by more than one person.
There.
Deputy Dale Lent from nearby Mojave County was brought in to assist the investigation. A narcotics officer trained in ground print identification, Lent could reconstruct crimes from foot and vehicle prints. He was one of only 2 trackers qualified to testify in Arizona court.
The first concern was to check the area to see if the guards had been taken somewhere away from the van and something had happened to them. So the first thing I did was do a 360 around the scene, which included checking the road further up.
The guards were nowhere to be found. But on a hill near where the van was abandoned, Lent discovered more tire tracks and footprints. From this position, there was an unobstructed view of the interstate that the guards traveled. Back near the van itself, the deputy found 2 separate sets of large footprints. Based on his observations, Lent concluded that at least one other vehicle and 2 perpetrators had been involved.
The vehicle had come down, backed up near the van, picked up something up, whether it be the 2 guards or whether it be the money. Hard to tell, but I'd say it was the money because it was a trail. It wasn't just one. It was a well beat out path.
Examining the strata of tread prints, Lent deduced that one vehicle had followed the van from the interstate to where it was abandoned. Deeper tracks leading back into the interstate showed that the vehicle had left much heavier than when it came. Investigators believed that, dead or alive, the guards had been taken by the assailants. The FBI turned to the media for help.
We did what we could to keep this on the front page of the news, and we did what we could to make sure that people were aware that we were looking for these guards.
The media reports generated calls from witnesses. Several motorists claimed to have seen the van stopped on the northbound side of Interstate 17 on the morning of May 24th.
They had already been pulled over.
One saw an Arizona Department of Public Safety officer walking towards the van. Other witnesses had similar stories, but details differed. The make and color of the officer's car varied. In some accounts, he was parked in front of the van. Other times, he was stopped behind. Agents contacted the Arizona Department of Public Safety. No officers had reported stopping an armored van on I-17 that morning.
Well, at that point, I was fairly convinced that something amiss had probably happened to the guards, that somehow, someplace, they had been stopped, and they had let their guard down, and that they'd been taken captive. And being that we didn't find the guards in the immediate vicinity, it soon became evident that the guards probably were taken against their will.
The FBI and Deputy Lent searched Interstate 17 for the spot witnesses had described. The tracker found the place where he believed the van had been stopped.
The marks were fresh within the time frame, 24 to 48 hours. You could see where the door was, where somebody got out, where there were scuff marks there on the ground. It looked like, where there'd been movement.
Digs and gouges in the dirt indicated that there had been a struggle near the rear of the van. A second vehicle's tire tracks at the interstate matched those in the remote area where the van had been abandoned. Curiously, the same tracks were found further up the road, just in front of where the van had been pulled over. Several motorists even underwent hypnosis to provide details to a sketch artist of what they remembered. Some recalled that the officer at the scene wore a hat. Others claimed the officer had no hat. But none of the sketches produced any leads. The FBI had reached a dead end. Then, on the morning of June 16, 1977, 300 miles northwest of where the van had been abandoned, two men made a gruesome discovery while fishing at Lake Mead. The men discovered a body floating in Debbie's Cove. They contacted the National Park Service. Investigators sped to the cove where the body had been spotted. Local law enforcement joined the National Park Service divers. They pulled close to the corpse. The body was fully clothed. Its head and torso were covered with a canvas bag. An officer retrieved a wallet from the back pocket. The victim was Russell Dempsey, one of the missing armored car guards. The divers searched the area but couldn't find the second guard's body. Not far below the surface, they discovered two sticks of wood connected by a rope.
Hey guys! What you got? Okay, bring it on over to the boat here.
To investigators, it appeared to be a garrote used to strangle someone. The robbery was now a murder investigation. Investigators still had nothing that could lead them to any suspects. They only knew that an Arizona public safety officer, or someone masquerading as one, might be involved. On the morning of June 16, 1977, National Park Service divers in Arizona retrieved a dead body from Lake Mead. It was one of two armored car guards that had disappeared on May 24th, along with $293,000. The whereabouts of the second guard and the money remained unknown. The county medical examiner determined that the guard found in the lake had suffered a heart attack. He had also been strangled. Investigators believed that a garrote recovered near the body had been used to choke him. A strand of the victim's hair found tangled in the device supported their suspicions. FBI agents traveled to Lake Mead to question people who were familiar with the resort area. Whoever had dumped the body had likely used a boat to get to the deeper water. More than 20 agents canvassed rental shops around the 247-square-mile lake. No one reported any suspicious activity, but agents collected rental receipts in the hopes they'd eventually have a suspect's name to reference. Special Agent Laird Hestand, now retired from the FBI's Kingman Resident Agency, joined the case. He would search for names on receipts any place a traveler might have visited in the area.
We didn't have any good leads on who had committed this crime. And our assistant agent in charge in the Phoenix office decided to have FBI agents check every service station from the area where the armored car was located all the way up to Lake Mead where the body had been transported.
That was a distance of more than 300 miles. Considering all the different routes to the lake, the agents had hundreds of service stations to check. The agent started his inquiries at the station owned by an acquaintance named Stan.
I asked Stan if he had heard anything about the robbery, and he said to me, "I've been waiting for somebody to come to talk to me." And then he related to me that the day after the robbery that he had to take his tow truck up to Lake Mead and pull a truck out of the lake that had backed out into the lake.
On May 25th, Stan had received a call from two men whose truck was stuck at Benelli Landing on the lake. The men explained they had gotten drunk while fishing and backed their truck too close to the water. The owner didn't see any fishing equipment in the pickup, but he did notice drag marks in the dust of the flatbed. It appeared that something heavy had been hauled out of the back.
All right.
Stan brought the two men to his service station. He wrote a receipt and asked for a signature. The customers hesitated before one agreed to sign. The name he used was Mike Poland. The station owner believed he'd be able to identify the men if he saw them again. It was the break investigators had been hoping for. The ease by which he found it surprised Special Agent Hestand.
The first place I walk into, I developed this information. It totally caught me off guard and shocked me. And I said, "Oh boy, this is it. We finally have something that we can start from."
Agents searched for the name Michael Poland amongst the thousands of boat rental receipts collected from Lake Mead. After several hours, they found it. Michael Poland had rented a boat the day after the robbery naming Benelli Landing as his destination. It was the same spot from where his truck had been towed. Agents returned to Lake Mead, searching for additional evidence between Benelli Landing and the boat rental shop on the opposite shore. Within the breadth of that 4.5 mile span, officers spotted another bag-covered corpse floating on the surface. It was the second missing courier guard. He had been severely beaten before he was drowned. The medical examiner found 2 welts on his chest, consistent with wounds inflicted by a high-voltage taser gun. The guard's personal effects were removed, including a self-winding watch that had stopped at 10:37 p.m. on May 26th. Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth's team redoubled their search for clues at Lake Mead.
Based upon where their bodies were found and the currents and the length of time that we felt that they had been in the water itself, we were able to track back where we thought they may have been put in at Lake Mead.
That area was just 100 yards from Debbie's Cove, where the body of the first guard had surfaced. Divers focused on a ledge 12 feet down that bordered an 800-foot trench. A sweep of the ledge yielded a third canvas bag, similar to the ones that covered the bodies. The bag was sent to the FBI lab for processing. Inside the bag, agents recovered an Arizona license plate that resembled those used on Arizona public safety cruisers. 2 revolvers were also found, but no prints could be lifted from the corroded weapons. Rocks that matched those from Benelli Landing had held the bag at the bottom. Examiners also found concrete dust caked in the weave of the canvas bag. Agents called on Stan, hoping the service station owner could identify a driver's license photo of Michael Poland, one of the 2 men that had hired him to tow their pickup from Benelli Landing. Among 6 photos, Stan recognized the face of Michael Poland. The FBI had finally confirmed a primary suspect. They hoped Michael Poland would lead them to another. In June of 1977, the FBI pursued whoever killed 2 armored car guards and made off with $293,000. Tire tracks and footprints at the crime scene suggested that at least 2 perpetrators were involved. Agents believed one of them was Michael Poland. They hoped surveillance of Poland would lead to another. Though he did not appear to have a job, Poland was spending a lot of money. Agents saw a new motorcycle on the property. The FBI identified a man who visited frequently as Michael's younger brother, Patrick. Patrick Poland had just bought a new car. When the brothers were inside, an agent approached Michael's teenage son and complimented the new motorcycle. The boy responded that his father had recently bought 2 of them, and a lot more. Agents expanded their investigation to include Patrick Poland and subpoenaed the financial records of both brothers. Prior to the armored van robbery, each had severe money problems. Shortly after, their debts had been paid and both had purchased new vehicles. Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth compared their income to their recent spending habits.
We tried to document as much as we could as to how much money they were spending and to what kind of means of support that they had. And the two just didn't seem to mesh very well. And when that happens, and then you know that folks have got access to a fairly large amount of money with no real means of support, that's a pretty good clue to us.
Agents interviewed the brother's father and photographed his pickup truck. Mr. Poland admitted that his sons had borrowed the truck on the day of the robbery. The father had mixed concrete in the flatbed several weeks before the robbery. Agents took a sample of the dust for processing. FBI examiners analyzed the concrete sample. They compared it to the cement dust on the canvas bags recovered from Lake Mead. Examiners concluded that the dust on the bag had come from the same batch of concrete taken from the truck. Once again, the FBI asked Stan to look at a photo lineup. The station owner could not identify Patrick Poland as the man with Michael.
This isn't the truck. It looks exactly like when I lowered it right down.
But he did recognize their father's truck as the one he towed from the lake.
That's it. That's it.
Positively.
In the early morning of July 27, 1977, agents arrived at Michael Poland's house with a search warrant. Poland claimed to be a self-employed jewelry salesman. He said that on the day of the heist, he was in Las Vegas buying gems.
There 3 days. What did you do on the way back?
Investigators found $12,000 in cash. He claimed it was used for their jewelry business. The agents confiscated numerous receipts. One of them was for a pair of high-voltage taser guns sold to a man named Mark Harris a month before the robbery. A short distance away, agents searched the house of Michael's brother, Patrick Poland. FBI Special Agent Frank Mowry, now retired, asked if he and his brother Michael had been at Lake Mead. Patrick gave a different story than his brother had.
He initially said that he and his brother were there fishing. He was very nervous. He was extremely nervous. He had difficulty in explaining a lot of about his whereabouts, particularly on the day of the crime and the day after the crime.
While Patrick was being interviewed, he received a call. It was his brother Michael.
Yeah, they're over here too.
He urged Patrick not to talk to investigators. The search at Patrick's house yielded a stash of weapons and $16,000 in cash. The FBI tracked down and processed the cars the brothers owned before the robbery. The tire treads did not match the tracks found at the crime scene. Examiners found no physical evidence that tied the cars to the crime. Agents visited the gun store where the tasers had been sold to Mark Harris prior to the robbery. The clerk who had made the sale could only remember that Harris was a white male in his 20s. Since the receipt was found in Michael Poland's home, they theorized it was probably his alias.
One of the things the FBI does is try to eliminate all other good logical suspects, and we did this in that case. The name Mark Harris, a rather common name, we had to eliminate that name as being anybody other than the alias of Mike Poland.
Special Agent Mowry searched public records for a Mark Harris between the ages of 25 and 40.
We actually identified literally hundreds of Mark Harrises, from vehicle records, motor vehicle records, phone books, and every way we could, and went out to their houses physically, tracked them down and interviewed them, and found that they did not have anything to do with this crime.
With no proof that Mark Harris was an alias for Michael Poland, and no physical evidence tying the brothers to the crimes, agents couldn't arrest the brothers. For the next 10 months, all agents could do was keep careful track of their movements. Special Agent Chenoweth flew helicopter surveillance.
We wanted to know everything that Michael and Patrick Poland did, what they had done in the past, what they were going to do in the future.
Investigators continued to document the brothers' spending habits. They watched as the Polands closed a deal on a gaming arcade. Despite the circumstantial evidence, agents were unable to make an arrest. The FBI had to find stronger physical evidence to prevent the Poland brothers from getting away with murder. In April of 1978, the FBI suspected Michael and Patrick Poland of killing 2 courier guards and stealing nearly $300,000. After 11 months of investigation, agents did not have enough to convince a grand jury to indict. FBI Special Agent Frank Mowry desperately searched for evidence that would strengthen the case.
What we badly needed was physical evidence. We didn't have fingerprints. We didn't have any real good eyewitnesses. We didn't have any physical bits of evidence that could link Mike and Pat Poland to the crime.
The agent focused on the 3 canvas bags retrieved from Lake Mead with the guards' bodies. He checked with over 20 sources in the Phoenix area where the bags might have been manufactured. None recognized the work.
Nobody could even give me a hint of who in town would make such a bag. Some even said, well, they probably came from out of town. So I became very discouraged.
The agent visited the last store on his list and showed the bag. The owner recognized it as coming from his company. It was a custom size with a unique stitch sewn only by their seamstresses. He also identified the specially ordered cord purchased from a Georgia company. As far as the owner knew, his was the only shop in the area that made anything like it.
He said, I will have in my record somewhere a receipt, because somebody would have walked in that door there and they would have said, I need to order so many bags, a certain length, a certain width, certain specifications.
At the Phoenix FBI office, agents pored over hundreds of receipts covering years of business from the bag manufacturer. After almost a week, they found one receipt for 3 custom canvas bags dated 1 month before the robbery. They were sold to a man named Mark Harris.
That's the Harris.
Agents had seen the name before on a receipt for a pair of tasers. They had found the voucher months earlier during a search of Michael Poland's house.
Hold on a second, Frank.
The FBI was further convinced that Mark Harris was an alias for Michael Poland. The canvas bag receipt connected the alias to the murdered guards, and cement dust in the pickup the brothers drove matched dust found in the bags. On May 17, 1978, after nearly a year of investigation, the federal grand jury returned an indictment for murder, kidnapping, and robbery against Michael and Patrick Poland.
Gentlemen, these men should both be considered extremely armed.
The FBI suspected that the Polands would not surrender quietly.
They've both already killed 2 men that we know of. You got your route planned. You're going to be picking up Patrick. We're going to be picking up Mike. Check your weapons. Check your vest.
Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth believed an armed confrontation was possible.
It had to be very well and meticulously planned. The Polands were very violent. They had shown their violence. They had a strong propensity to, commit violence, as evidenced by the guards' fate. And one of the things that we absolutely knew we could not do was to arrest them while they were in the house. And we absolutely had to take them away from the homes.
Agents feared the suspects would barricade themselves in their houses and shoot it out if they discovered they were going to be arrested.
This guy, yeah.
Agents waited for Patrick Poland to emerge.
Yep.
When he finally did, they noticed he was carrying a case for a handgun. They tailed him for a safe place to make the arrest. The second arrest team waited for Michael Poland to come out of a real estate office. Once outside, there would be less risk to bystanders if shooting erupted. The first arrest team caught up with Patrick outside the game arcade. The agents intercepted him before he entered the building.
We identified ourselves. Of course, he knew me already from previous contacts, and I told him the time had come and we had warrants for their arrest, and he gave up without any problem. He was armed. He had a .44 Magnum weapon on him and another couple of weapons in his car, but he made no effort to use them.
Agents radioed the other team that Patrick had been picked up. Michael Poland had been in the real estate office for almost 45 minutes. Agents feared that he had somehow gotten word of Patrick's arrest and was preparing for an armed confrontation. They decided to risk entering the building.
Federal agents, please step back. Mike Poland, you're under arrest.
The suspected murderer surrendered without incident.
They can provide one for you. You understand what I'm saying?
Michael Poland refused to answer questions. He insisted his brother do the same. No fingerprints tied either brother to the murdered guards or the abducted van. Michael remained confident that the FBI case was weak.
In a case like this, you've got a joint venue. Venue certainly lies with the federal government with respect to the actual robbery of the van, and but we also have a homicide case that rests with the state authorities.
Authorities considered their best strategy for a successful prosecution. State and federal prosecutors decided to split the charges. The Polands went on trial for robbery and kidnapping in federal court. Based on the circumstantial evidence gathered, a federal jury found the brothers guilty of the charges on February 15, 1979. They were sentenced to 100 years.
These were two guards that were very hardworking, very loyal to their company. Both of them had worked for about 20 years for the company. They were actually within weeks of retiring. They were family men, they were good men, religious men, men that had devoted a lot of time and effort and loyalty to this company. And on the eve of their retirement, they were killed.
In November of 1979, an Arizona state jury returned a guilty verdict for murder. The judge gave the brothers the death penalty. The Polands appealed their conviction. The Arizona Supreme Court found that the testimony of a hypnotized witness and the taser gun evidence should not have been used. They also found that the jury had inappropriately discussed the federal trial. The Poland brothers' state murder convictions were overturned. Though agents were certain that the brothers had brutally murdered two men, state prosecutors would not seek a new trial. Because of parole laws at the time, Michael and Patrick Poland would be eligible for parole in less than 7 years. In 1982, an Arizona prosecutor declined to retry Michael and Patrick Poland for murder.
We chose not to because of the exclusion of the eyewitness testimony.
He cited the cost, as well as the difficulty of proving the case with the evidence that had been excluded by the Arizona Supreme Court. United States Attorney Melvin McDonald was outraged that the Poland brothers might get away with murder.
I had followed it by way of the media and had never dreamed that I would play any role in the case until 1982, when it became clear that the ball was going to get dropped unless somebody stepped in. I called the county attorney and volunteered to take the case.
For the first time in history, a U.S. attorney was deputized as an Arizona state prosecutor. McDonald had to resurrect a case that many considered impossible to retry.
There had been 5 years transpired between the time of the crime and the time of the trial. Witnesses travel and move all over the country. Memories start to fade. And so you've got to recreate and present the crime as if it happened a month ago, when you're facing the problem that it's really 5 years old.
The prosecutor wanted to lock down the exact time that the victims had been deposited into Lake Mead and prove it was the same time the Polands were at the lake, so there would be no question the Polands were responsible.
One of the problems with the finding of the guards was that their bodies were not recovered for 6 weeks. The defense, we knew, would argue that they could have been dumped there by the real killers at any time.
Working with the FBI, the prosecutor found a piece of evidence that had been overlooked in the earlier trials. The second guard's self-winding watch. Examiners noted that the watch stopped at 10:37 p.m. on May 26th. That particular self-winding watch would stop working if it weren't moved for 12 hours. That meant that the guard's watch stopped 12 hours after his arm came to rest at the bottom of Lake Mead.
We actually had watch experts take the watch apart to prove that the watch had not stopped because of water damage. There was no water that had gotten into the portions of the watch that controlled its operation. We literally went all the way to Switzerland to get experts there to talk about how much time it would take for a watch that hadn't been cleaned in 5 years to finally unwind.
Watch to the jury, please.
Forensics experts used this information to determine exactly when the bodies had been dumped into the water. Their estimation exactly matched the time the FBI had established that the Polands were at the lake, getting their pickup towed from Benelli Landing. The prosecutor explained that the brothers had been there to dump the bodies.
For the drama point, I told the jury that while Mr. Newkirk is dead, he is speaking to you from the grave. He's asking you, look at my watch. I'm sending you a message through my watch.
After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury was convinced.
Will the defendants rise?
On November 18th, 1982, they found Michael and Patrick Poland guilty of murder. The judge reinstated a sentence of death.
All rise.
Once again, the defendants appealed the conviction.
It was one of the rare instances where their case went to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States, in a published opinion, a very closely divided court, again affirmed their conviction and sentences.
How the situation...
With nothing left to lose, Patrick Poland agreed to tell investigators and the families of the victims exactly what happened. In 1987, he gave his confession to FBI Special Agent Frank Mowry.
They had actually spent almost a year tailing the van. They knew its route. On those mornings that it went up to Prescott and delivered its money to the banks in Prescott, they knew the exact route. They knew the stops that it made. They knew the times that it did it. They knew everything about it.
The Polands used neither of their own cars in the robbery. They had rented one with cash that the FBI was unable to trace.
We never found it. It was a rental car. And by the time the rental car was taken back, by the time they figured out what was going on, it had been rented out probably 200 times since then. And we were never able to actually pin down for certainty the car that may have been used in the case.
The brothers affixed a light bar and a license plate that resembled those used by the Arizona Department of Public Safety.
Batteries waiting for that CB?
I believe so.
They readied their tools needed for the heist.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we got a spare set.
Good. You got enough ammunition?
Yeah.
The Polands waited more than an hour. The van was unexpectedly delayed. Finally, they saw their quarry. Patrick drove the disguised car while Michael hid under the dash. They stopped the van on the pretext of speeding. Company policy insisted that the guards never open the van doors to anyone, even if stopped by the police. Patrick ordered the driver to step out. When he failed to follow procedure, the driver and his partner were defenseless. The Polands put the guards in the rear of the van. Michael was to drive the van while Patrick drove the car. But when Patrick took off, the van didn't follow. This explained the tracks found in front of where the van was stopped. By the time Patrick reached the rear of the van, Michael was beating the guards. They stunned the guards with high-voltage tasers. The brothers drove the vehicles into the desert near the town of Bumblebee.
Pat.
One of the guards looked as if he had died from the beating. Michael decided that the other would have to die as well. He had a makeshift garrote in his pocket, a cord tied to 2 pieces of wood.
And the one thing we found out about it, of course, is that Mike was obviously the planner, the instigator, and the enforcer, and everything related to the crime, and that he was the one who physically murdered the 2 guards. Pat, of course, helped him at Mike's insistence, but it was Mike who put the rope around their neck and choked them.
Went around the back.
Patrick claimed that Michael had buried most of the money in the desert.
Just had to stop.
At least one of the Polands' relatives knew where that was. Because she cooperated, the authorities didn't prosecute her for her involvement. The money had rotted from the elements in the intervening years. Patrick's confession gave closure to the case.
We knew most of it. We felt better, of course, when the person actually admits it, because there's always some room for doubt until you get it from the heart and from the mouth of the perpetrator.
The courts turned down all appeals for the Polands. The state of Arizona finally administered a lethal injection to Michael Poland on June 16, 1999. After all calls for clemency were denied, Patrick Poland was executed 9 months later on March 15, 2000. Unlike his older brother, Patrick used his final moments to express regret for the pain and suffering he had caused. An armored car vanished during a routine stop. Carrying nearly $1 million, it was supposed to be impenetrable. Investigators didn't know if the driver was involved or if he had been ambushed. FBI agents and local detectives began to suspect a group of former law officers in the heist. It would take determination and high technology to track the robbers and make them pay for their silent strike.
Money may not be the root of all evil, but for some men, $1 million is enough to justify murder. Even men sworn to uphold the law can sometimes be tempted. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When robbery turned to murder, the FBI would discover that a killer might be among them.
The Arrowhead Mall, Glendale, Arizona. November 28, 1994. At 1:30 p.m., a van pulled up outside a department store at the mall. It was an unmarked, fully armored Wells Fargo vehicle. Several companies use these customized vans since they are less conspicuous targets for robbery. Following company protocol, the driver remained inside the van while the courier went to pick up cash from the store. The van was bulletproof, and its doors could not be forced open from the outside. Inside the department store office, the courier exchanged empty bags for those filled with the weekend's receipts. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving. The cash pickup followed the busiest shopping weekend of the year. When the courier returned to the parking lot minutes later, the armored van and the driver were gone. He notified police immediately. The 911 call came to the Glendale, Arizona Police Department. They dispatched units to the scene and sent word to the FBI. The nearest FBI field office is in Phoenix, 20 miles from the mall. Because the money in the van was federally insured, the FBI opened a case. Agents headed out to the scene. Glendale detectives arrived at the mall first. They began interviewing the courier. He said he had been gone only 4 minutes when he discovered the van and his partner, John McGosh, had disappeared. The courier estimated the amount of cash, checks, and coins in the van to be just over $1 million. Detectives interviewed others at the mall. None reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. FBI agents soon arrived from Phoenix. Evidence technicians had processed the area. Where the van had been parked, they found a cigarette butt and a pair of broken eyeglasses. The courier confirmed that his partner was a smoker and said the glasses looked like those McGosh needed when he drove. The technicians collected and marked the items as evidence.
David 44 to David
Detective
41.
Tom Clayton is a senior investigator for the Glendale Police Department.
On me, 211. 10-4. I think the first thought when we saw the van missing was the driver took off with the money and was going to leave town. We also considered somebody could have robbed him. With the glasses laying there, we weren't sure if it's, is it a setup or did something really happen. We explored every possibility we could think of.
Okay, van was
Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth, now retired, was the lead for the FBI.
In increments going outward, so how do you think best to do that?
The investigators organized a search for the van and its driver, believing that whoever took the van would abandon it soon in favor of a getaway car. They dispatched some officers to begin a ground search around the mall. Pilots from the Arizona Department of Public Safety conducted an aerial search. The DPS officers began at the mall, then widened their search in concentric circles, looking for the van in the surrounding neighborhoods. Whenever they spotted a white van, they radioed ground units to follow up. Special Agent Chenoweth and the others knew most armored car robberies are inside jobs or armed ambushes. Witnesses hadn't heard shooting. Perhaps the driver had decided to trade his hourly wage for $1 million.
And certainly, the van is supposed to be locked and the driver inside, and therefore inaccessible. The fact that the van is missing would lead us to initially at least think about the possibility of the guard driver being involved.
Investigators sought more information on the missing driver.
We investigated John McGosh. First off, we started running his name in the computer to see if we could find any arrests or if he had a criminal history. We started through the Wells Fargo file, his employment file, looking for relatives, friends, where he lived.
After securing a search warrant, investigators traveled to his apartment. His landlady let them in. The investigators were looking for evidence that McGosh had planned the robbery. The apartment appeared undisturbed. Nothing indicated he had planned the robbery or that he was ready to leave town.
Do you know who this is?
Yes. That's Lisa Jones.
Detectives learned that McGosh had a daughter living nearby in Phoenix.
Live here? All right. Does she live here?
Determining her address through DMV records, they went to interview her.
Glendale Police. Detective Myers, Detective Clayton. Can I talk to you for just a moment?
McGosh's daughter described her father as honest and stable. He took his job seriously. Police found others who said the same. McGosh had no criminal record.
Well, right now, your father and the
Detectives began to consider the 61-year-old grandfather not as a suspect, but as a victim.
John McGosh had a good reputation. We talked to family, friends, relatives, co-workers. He was a person that did not have a lot of requirements in life. Money wasn't a big concern. Based on the background we did on him, we didn't believe he was going to be involved in the crime.
With McGosh eliminated as a suspect, the investigators were back to square one. They needed the public's help.
Certainly when you don't have eyewitnesses, you try and put as much information out in the form of press releases, newspaper articles, things of this nature, in hopes that it would reach somebody that maybe saw something that otherwise had not heard about it.
That afternoon, the FBI and Glendale police held a press conference.
I wanted to give you an update on bank heist outside the mall earlier.
They released photos and descriptions of the missing van and driver.
As of yet, we have very little.
Anyone who had seen John McGosh or the Wells Fargo van was asked to contact the FBI.
Investigation without assistance.
A reward of $60,000 was posted for any tip leading to the recovery of the money and the conviction of those involved.
Anyone may know where the van is at this point.
Hours later, a 911 call came in from a church in Sun City, Arizona, just outside Glendale. The caller reported a van idling in the church's parking lot. Parishioners arriving for a Monday night bingo game noticed the van, which fit the description in the news reports. License plates and serial numbers confirmed it was the van missing from the mall. Investigators approached cautiously, not knowing who or what was inside. No one was in the driver's seat, but investigators could see the outline of a body on the floor. They tried to open the van, but the armored vehicle was impenetrable, even to the agents.
The engine was going, it was locked, and a cursory examination initially of the inside disclosed the body lying in the center. In order to gain access to the van, of course, we had to call the armored car company.
No one at the church had seen who left the van
About what time did you
or what vehicle they used to get away.
notice anybody else around?
Checking the body through the window, police could see blood on the chest near a Wells Fargo badge. There was no sign of breathing. Authorities believed John McGosh had been killed during the robbery. There were no bullet marks on the van's exterior, no broken glass, and no sign of forced entry at the doors. Whoever had hit the van knew what they were doing.
An armored car robbery is a pretty sophisticated crime, and it takes a lot of detailed planning. And so we knew after finding the van and finding the body that we were up against probably some people who had thought this out very well, planned it extensively, and certainly would not stop at murder in carrying this out.
Investigators needed to get inside the van to know what happened. On November 28, 1994, the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police investigated an armored van hijacked from a mall and abandoned in a church parking lot in nearby Sun City. The driver, 61-year-old John McGosh, lay dead in the cab. He had been shot once in the head, but his death was not instantaneous. Technicians noted aspirated blood spatter, indicating McGosh had continued breathing after being shot. Technicians lifted many latent prints from money cabinets in the van's interior. These would be compared to known prints of employees. No foreign prints were found. No hairs or fibers pointed toward a suspect either. Inside the van, investigators found $132,000 in coins. The cash and checks, estimated at $920,000, were gone. The details of the crime suggested that there had been several violent criminals, according to Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth.
After looking at the van, We knew that we were probably dealing with certainly more than one person, because this would be very difficult for one person to accomplish. So we knew we were looking probably at least 2 or more, and very vicious and violent people who certainly would not stop at anything in order to obtain their goals, which was the money located inside the van.
To Glendale Detective Tom Clayton, the placement of the van outside Glendale city limits spoke to the criminal's understanding of police procedure.
We believed they dumped the van in Sun City to get it out of our jurisdiction into another one, to complicate the investigation and communication of police agencies, maybe hoping we would not be able to link the two things together right away.
During the autopsy of the armored car driver, the medical examiner retrieved several small bullet fragments from the left side of the victim's head. The fragments were too damaged to determine the make of the murder weapon. It seemed like a small caliber, perhaps a .22. The medical examiner found no powder burns on the victim's head. This meant he had been shot from a distance. Magash's partner said the driver often smoked a cigarette while waiting in the van. Though it was against company policy, he usually opened his door to let the smoke out. Investigators believed the killers knew this and shot him when he opened the door. Because of his experience tracking down elusive criminals, now retired FBI Special Agent Ron Myers was transferred from the Fugitive Task Force to work the case. From the beginning, he knew they were not hunting amateurs.
One of the things they did that made us think that they were professionals was the manner in which they did the robbery. They picked an isolated part of the shopping center where not many people parked, where there wouldn't be many witnesses. They drove through the type of neighborhoods where there weren't many people out during the day, and they picked an empty parking lot of a church that had no one at it during the day. Go right in here, sir.
Investigators received dozens of calls to their tip line. One witness came forward, claiming to have some information that might be helpful. He said he had seen a white van quickly leaving the mall at the time in question. A red pickup truck followed not far behind, but he wasn't sure if the two vehicles were together. Investigators were frustrated that no one saw the actual ambush at the mall.
We couldn't find any eyewitnesses. And when you don't really know what happened, or you don't have somebody that can tell you what maybe transpired with the van, it's a mystery.
With no other solid leads, investigators canvassed the neighborhoods between the mall and the church. Perhaps someone there had witnessed something. Edward Morgan, a resident of Sun City, recalled that he had seen the van. On the afternoon of November 28th, Mr. Morgan was returning from the post office when he noticed the van.
And Mr. Morgan stopped because he thought they weren't going to stop for the stop sign and was afraid he'd be hit. At that time, he noticed the white van with this red truck shortly behind it, both speeding through the intersection and driving off. And he thought that was kind of unusual, not only the way they were driving, but the way that the red truck seemed to be following the white van.
Mr. Morgan couldn't recall details of license plates or the face of the van's passenger. Desperate for a break, investigators wanted to place him under hypnosis to jog his memory. Morgan agreed to travel to Texas with the investigators. There they met with a forensic hypnotist. Perhaps under hypnosis, the witness could remember more details about the incident. Statements made under hypnosis cannot be used in court, but some police agencies find it to be a helpful investigative tool. Under hypnosis, Morgan returned to the events of November 28th. He recalled the white van and the man in the passenger seat. Investigators now believe there were at least 3 people involved in the heist, 2 in the van and 1 in the red truck. When asked about the truck's license plate, Morgan was able to remember a portion.
237.
Very good.
It wasn't much, but it gave investigators a start.
We had to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to run all combinations of those license numbers, and that produced several hundred possible vehicles because Arizona does not have color on their motor vehicle registration. So we knew we were looking for a particular type of truck, but from looking at the motor vehicle registrations, we didn't know what color they were on the registration, which meant we had to do interviews of everybody on the list.
Investigators eventually tracked down hundreds of truck owners. Each was interviewed, but no suspect emerged. With his refreshed memory of the van's passenger, Morgan worked with a police sketch artist. There was no guarantee that the details recalled through hypnosis were accurate, but authorities were ready to try almost anything. The FBI released the drawing to the media.
For nearly a month now, police and FBI have continued looking for suspects in the Glendale armored.
The FBI and Glendale, Arizona police believed 3 men were involved in the robbery homicide. Yet, as the end of 1994 approached, they still didn't have suspects. It began to look like the killers might never be found.
Martha, do you have the TV on?
But the investigators did not know that the suspect in the composite sketch had been recognized.
Call me back in like 10 minutes.
By December of 1994, a month after the deadly hijacking of an armored car in Glendale, Arizona, the investigation had stalled. Investigators believed at least 3 people pulled off the heist. They had a composite sketch of one and little else. Then, on December 31st, the investigators received a call. A Mesa, Arizona detective had been told that a local woman had information about the crime.
Okay, thanks.
A background check showed that the woman had a suspended license. This would make it easy to bring her in for questioning without arousing suspicions. The FBI asked local law enforcement to pick her up on the suspended license charge. The investigators asked the woman if she knew anything about the armored car robbery in Glendale. She claimed that she didn't have any real information, but she knew someone who did.
We talked on the phone just a few days ago.
Could you write it down?
She told investigators that her friend, Judy Espinoza, had talked to her after the news reports of the robbery.
Looks just like him.
Espinoza suspected that her boyfriend might have been involved.
Are you watching it? Right. Right. They're saying he might be connected with the armored car.
The woman told the investigators where Espinoza worked. The investigators spoke with Espinoza.
Good afternoon, Miss Espinoza.
They asked her about the robbery, reminding her that interfering with a federal investigation was itself a crime. She agreed to answer their questions. She explained that her boyfriend, James Greenham, who went by the nickname Yoda, had asked her what she would do if he held up an armored car and suddenly had a lot of money. She told FBI Special Agent Ron Myers that Greenham sometimes worked as a bounty hunter and was usually broke.
Jim never had a dime, but the day of the robbery, He came home that night, told her he had to kill somebody, and he had plenty of cash on his person. She told us that Jim did his bounty hunting with a guy named Tim Ring, and that she had been over to Tim Ring's house and noticed several new all-terrain vehicles, jet skis, a new motorcycle, and Tim had made a comment about how she'd never know how much money was in that garage.
The information was good, but it was only hearsay. Investigators needed more solid evidence. Espinosa had kept several rolls of coins that Greenham had given her. The wrappers were consistent with those used by merchants on the armored van's route. More than a month after the crime, the investigators finally had names. They looked into the two suspects' backgrounds. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth was familiar with the name of one of the men. Tim Ring had been used as an informant in other FBI cases.
We had paid him for some information that he had furnished us in the past, and you know, in order for us to get information from informants, you aren't dealing with priests and with you know good people. You're dealing with bad guys out there, and Ring's a bad guy.
And when you're ready, focused, squeeze the trigger.
Tim Ring and James Greenham had worked as prison guards in Phoenix and now worked bounty hunter jobs together.
Front sight or through the crosshairs.
Both had many hours of firearms training.
Any questions? Okay, Joe.
Ring was an expert marksman.
Fire when ready.
Pursuing bounty hunters would be dangerous.
The fact that these suspects had law enforcement training in their background made the case pretty difficult. For one, they would be schooled in surveillance techniques. If they were looking for somebody following them, they'd know what to look for. They'd know what to expect anybody following them to do. So we had to be very cautious when we were following them around.
The FBI and Glendale police began 24-hour ground and air surveillance. They had to be covert.
You know, if they're looking for air surveillance, they're looking up, you know. Well, we're way over here because we can't see anything if we're right up here. You know? So we're way over here, way over here.
The agents wanted to see how the pair earned money and how much they spent.
At the time that we were following Mr. Greenham and Mr. Ring around, neither one was gainfully employed that we could tell. They had no income coming in from any legitimate sources, yet we observed them spending a lot of money.
Ring overhauled his truck and Greenham got a new apartment. Both bought motorcycles. Agents tracked their purchases. It seemed the suspects did not exceed a certain level in order to avoid the attention of the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay. And they always seemed to be careful whenever they spent their money to stay under the $10,000 limit, knowing that if they spent more than that in cash, the expenditure would be reported by the businesses to the IRS.
Investigators continued tailing Ring and Greenham, building a list of associates. They photographed everyone the suspects met. They still didn't know who the third partner was. Glendale detective Tom Clayton hoped surveillance would spot the three meeting somewhere.
We would watch them go to restaurants where they would meet. We would see them go to strip clubs where they met a couple dancers that they knew.
Everywhere they went, the suspects spent a lot of cash, unaware that investigators were watching. Circumstantial evidence linked them to the robbery and homicide. But the FBI and Glendale police still didn't know exactly what had happened and who else was involved. Somehow, the investigators had to get inside the bounty hunter's shadowy world. As the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police continued to investigate a deadly armored car heist, they got a tip from an associate of their two main suspects. Bounty hunter Michael Sanders said that he had cased armored cars with two other men. He believed those men did the Glendale hit without him. Angry at being cut out of the deal, he decided to talk. He gave FBI Special Agent Ron Myers a lead on the third perpetrator.
Sanders came forward to tell us that he thought that Tim Ring and Jim Greenham were involved in this armored car robbery, and that an ex-Phoenix police officer named Fergie, who worked for a camera shop in the Paradise Valley Mall, might be the third man.
Investigators needed to identify Fergie.
So what we're going to do is
they reviewed their case
set up on
photos.
Tonight, try to take some pictures and get a bunch for that guy there too.
Surveillance teams had watched Ring and Greenham meeting with a bearded man who drove a Camaro. The car was registered to William Ferguson. Since Sanders said Fergie was an ex-cop, Glendale detective Tom Clayton checked the personnel records of the Phoenix Police Department.
As we investigated William Ferguson's background, we found he retired at 20 years from the Phoenix Police Department, and his retirement was precipitated by some disciplinary problems.
Investigators began surveillance on Ferguson. They saw that the ex-cop met often with the other suspects and was also spending a lot of cash. Agents believed they had identified the three men responsible for the robbery and murder.
The investigation was affected by the three suspects having law enforcement training because we knew that they were going to cover evidence, and they were also known to have firearms training, which made them dangerous to the surveillance officers.
Detectives and agents needed evidence linking the men to the crime. During surveillance, they began trash pulls, confiscating trash bags from the suspects in the hopes that some clues might surface. FBI technicians examined the trash. In rings, they found several 3x5 index cards. Each card had notes detailing armored car routes. Analysis confirmed the handwriting was Ring's. But investigators needed more. They wanted tapes of the suspects discussing the crime. All three men had keys to James Greenham's apartment. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth believed they used the apartment as headquarters.
Timothy Ring was married, had a wife, children, and I think the likelihood of discussions occurring in regards to this armored car robbery at his house were somewhat remote, but we felt that they were occurring at Greenham's residence, so that was the impetus for which we decided to go ahead and proceed and place a listening device inside the apartment of Greenham.
Special Agent Myers was part of the team that entered the apartment to place the bug.
When we opened the door to go in, an alarm went off immediately, at which point we shut the door and exited the area. We had to come back at a later time with an expert in alarms, and when we went in the door that time, we learned that it was just a real simple motion detector sitting on top of the refrigerator, and all we had to do was just flip the off switch. It wasn't anything sophisticated at all.
While the team was inside Greenham's apartment, the detective surveilling Tim Ring saw him leave his house. Ring owned a red truck like the one reportedly seen following the van. The detective trailed behind Ring. After a few turns, he realized where the suspect was headed. Agents were still in the apartment. Tim Ring was headed that way. Ring often went to Greenham's place, even when Greenham was out. If he went to the apartment, he would interrupt the planting of the bug.
His license is under suspension. Then run his place.
The team inside needed more time.
I'll pull him over and hold him until you get her.
The detective called in a uniformed officer to stop Ring for speeding. Anything to delay the suspect.
Good evening, sir. What's the problem?
The officer lectured Ring on the dangers of speeding. Detectives wanted to keep him busy while the team finished at the apartment.
Let's go, gang. They're on their way over. Okay, put everything away. Let's get this thing back.
They made it out just before Ring arrived.
Some notices in the rec center.
Investigators also tapped the home and cellular phones of the two other suspects. To get them talking, Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth released false information about the case.
We decided to make a press release talking about the investigation, which we thought when they would hear would certainly generate some telephone conversations and other discussions amongst these three suspects. And it did have its desired effect in that they did talk about the information that we released and how accurate they thought it was and whether or not we were on the right trail and whether or not they thought we were getting close to them.
As the suspects talked, the investigators listened.
We didn't get an actual confession where they said, I did the armored car robbery. What we got were several conversations among themselves about different aspects of the case. They would always listen to the news, follow any printed reports or follow any television stories, and as soon as anything would appear on TV, they'd call each other. And they'd make comments like, well, this isn't the way it happened. You know, they'll never find that license plate.
The evidence against the suspects was building.
Man, you seen Judy lately?
But prosecutors wanted more direct statements about the crime before they ordered arrests. Investigators provoked the suspects one more time. A Glendale detective went to James Greenham's apartment when the suspect was out. On the door, he left his business card with the note, Lead 173. Investigators watched Greenham's response to the card. He knew what the note meant. The authorities considered him a lead. Greenham became distraught. He sped away from his apartment, calling Tim Ring on his cell phone. Agents kept watch from an airplane and listened in on the phone taps.
Tim, man, listen.
Greenham drove out into the desert before stopping.
Business card in my door.
Look, man, they ain't got nothing on you. Don't worry about it.
Ring tried to calm Greenham down, promising that the authorities had nothing on them.
Everything's, don't worry about it.
But Greenham said he was scared.
I can't do this anymore.
He even threatened to commit suicide. Finally, Ring talked Greenham down, convincing him the authorities were not on to them.
But if I see one more cop,
Greenham said that if another cop contacted him, he was going to bury the money. It seemed a direct reference to the crime. The investigators felt they finally had enough evidence.
Greenway and 6th Avenue. Continuing search northbound.
They sent units to arrest Greenham and Ferguson.
Jim Greenham was arrested by one team. William Ferguson was arrested by another and attempted to resist arrest but was quickly subdued. Tim Ring was lured down to the FBI office on the premise of looking at some photographs because Ring had previously offered to help the FBI try to find who these people were, which we believe was an effort on his part to try and find out what we knew.
The FBI agent who had previously used Ring as an informant called the suspect. Ring agreed to come in. On February 16, 1995, Tim Ring arrived at the Phoenix FBI field office. Undercover agents were waiting for him in the lobby. They believed he would not be armed at the FBI office, but they couldn't be positive. To ensure their safety, they needed to surprise him.
We had two big burly defensive tactics instructors, one of which was a guy with 25 years of martial arts expertise who came up and whopped him in the head and knocked him down like a sack of potatoes before he knew what he was doing.
All three suspects were off the streets. Now investigators needed physical evidence to make sure the prosecutions were successful. On February 16, 1995, after arresting 3 men for an armored car robbery and murder, FBI agents and Glendale, Arizona detectives searched the suspects' residences. At the house of Tim Ring, suspected leader of the three, they found important evidence. Investigators recovered a note marked with the initials F, Y, and T. Each initial had a number beneath.
Looks like serial numbers from the bank.
Numbers added up to the amount of cash taken from the armored car. Agents believed F stood for Fergie, Y for Greenham's nickname Yoda, and T for Tim. It was the worksheet the three used to divide the money. In the garage, investigators found a red pickup truck that resembled the vehicle seen by witness Edward Morgan in Sun City. The license plate number, however, did not match the ones Morgan recalled under forensic hypnosis. Ring kept several weapons and plenty of ammunition at his house. In a duffel bag, agents also recovered $270,000 in cash. Another $64,000 was found at Ferguson's house.
We need to count all of it.
Nearly $600,000 in cash had been stolen. Noting the money spent by the suspects, investigators found that about $100,000 was unaccounted for. The case against the three suspects seemed solid. FBI Special Agent Ron Myers hoped the evidence might get one of them to roll.
We finally got first-hand information about this crime when Jim Greenham decided to cooperate. Jim Greenham was the only one of the three of them that showed any remorse about what they had done, about how they had killed this driver. Jim decided to cooperate. He told us what happened. He told us all the parts that these individuals played in the robbery.
Greenham met with the investigators and explained that the planning started in the fall of 1994.
Ferguson and I just watched when
Tim Ring had the idea to hit an armored car.
I wasn't crazy about the fact that he was going to kill him.
What were you planning on
So they began to case Wells Fargo vehicles. They drove around Glendale, following different trucks and vans on their routes. Then they zeroed in on the van driven by John McGosh, tailing it for days.
They managed to observe this one particular armored car making several stops, and they noticed that every time the messenger would get out to make a delivery, the driver would open the door about 8 inches to smoke and blow the smoke out the side of the door. They observed the driver at several stops, and they noticed this one particular stop on the back side of a shopping center, and noticed that he always parked in the same position.
On November 28, 1994, the Monday after Thanksgiving, a day they were sure a lot of money would be in the van, they were ready to strike. James Greenham and William Ferguson waited unnoticed by the store. They watched until the courier was out of sight. As if on schedule, McGosh opened the door to smoke. Tim Ring was parked 50 feet away, a stolen license plate on his truck. The expert marksman had a silencer on his .22 caliber rifle so no one would hear the shot. He aimed through the opening and fired once. The force must have knocked McGosh's glasses to the ground. With the driver down, the van was unprotected. No one noticed the vehicle speed away. They drove to the church parking lot. It would be empty at that time of day. They transferred the money and checks to the pickup. They knew authorities would be searching for the van. They left most of the coins and went to destroy the checks and other evidence, according to Detective Tom Clayton.
They loaded the money into Tim Ring's truck and drove out in the desert where they separated the money, changed clothes, and burned all the evidence.
We buried the license plate.
Greenham said they buried the burned evidence and stolen license plate in the desert.
And you can take us to where the plates are buried?
Yeah.
Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth wondered if it was the plate witnessed by Edward Morgan.
We went out there and actually found the location and then dug it up and found that the 3 numbers actually on the plate did in fact match those that were given to us by Mr. Morgan. So he was actually right on his information.
James Greenham pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed robbery and is serving 27.5 years. William Ferguson pled guilty to armed robbery and accessory after the fact and is doing 17 years. On December 6, 1996, Tim Ring was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and burglary.
Any time that you have somebody actually assassinate a driver like this, it's a very heinous crime, and you certainly want to expend all of your resources in an effort to identify the people involved and put them behind bars.
For his crimes, Ring received the death penalty. He currently awaits execution at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. A young girl set out to run an errand for her mother. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear she did not simply wander off. With no clues to her whereabouts, local authorities called in the FBI to help. Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was going only a few blocks, but the search for her would spread to 3 states.
Every parent faces the question, when is a child old enough to leave the house alone? For mother in Tucson, her 8-year-old daughter's bike ride to the corner mailbox turned into a 2-month nightmare. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI can enter a case after 24 hours. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take dozens of agents working in 2 states to track down a paroled sex offender. But it would take a mother's courage to change the laws that released a monster.
Monday, September 17th, 1984. At around 3 in the afternoon in Flowing Wells, Arizona, outside Tucson, 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, just home from school, was helping her mom send a belated birthday card to her aunt. Because her big sister was staying late at school for track practice, Vicki asked her mom if she could mail the card by herself. The mailbox was little more than 2 blocks away. After telling her daughter to be back before 3:30, Debbie Carlson gave her consent to her elated youngest daughter. According to Mrs. Carlson, the trip to the mailbox and back would take less than 10 minutes.
I sent Vicki by herself, which was the first time I'd ever sent any one of my children by themselves to run an errand. We always used the buddy system.
Little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was on her first big solo adventure. According to her mother, she beamed with pride over the responsibility she had been given. She promised to come right home after mailing the card. About 20 minutes after Vicki left, Debbie Carlson was reassured by the sound of the front door.
Stephanie?
And a little surprised to see that it was Vicki's older sister, Stephanie.
Do me a favor, go look for your sister.
Her track practice had been canceled.
Vicki went down to the mailbox.
Mrs. Carlson told her that Vicki went out to mail a letter but hadn't returned. Stephanie thought her sister might be playing with a friend.
Stephanie goes, oh, I'll go look for her. She probably stopped at Jennifer's house. So Stephanie, the second time in one day, I sent one of my kids without the buddy system.
Stephanie found Vicki's bike lying on the side of the road.
Vicki!
She called her little sister's name.
Vicki!
She hurried home to tell her mom.
Well, right away, that was an antenna for me because Vicki would have never left her bike in the middle of the street. That was her pride and joy. She took care of that bike like it was, a prized possession.
Debbie Carlson drove to the spot with her daughter to collect Vicki's bike.
Vicki!
Stephanie checked the house nearby to see if anyone had seen her little sister. No one answered. Shortly after loading Vicki's abandoned bike into the car, Mrs. Carlson was overwhelmed by emotion.
I was on my way back home. I just uncontrollably started crying. It was like I knew something was wrong. It just was so out of character, something was wrong.
All right, when's the last time you seen your dog?
Mrs. Carlson called the Pima County Sheriff's Office. She also called Mr. Carlson home from work. The little girl had been missing less than 90 minutes, but concern within the community grew quickly.
everybody's reaction was the same, that there was something wrong. There was something not right with this situation.
Debbie Carlson provided photos of Vicki to deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Police retraced her route to see where she might have encountered trouble. Her destination was the mailbox in front of a convenience store near a busy intersection, only a few blocks away from her home.
Yes, sir. How you doing? Okay, Tom Kernan.
A deputy asked the manager if he'd seen the 8-year-old.
Have you seen this girl? Have you seen her? Do you recognize her?
The manager recognized her from previous visits, but hadn't seen her that day.
Have you seen her in the last, say, hour or 2 hours?
Deputies also canvassed the surrounding neighborhood. They checked first at her best friend's house. Mrs. Spencer said that neither she nor her daughter had seen Vicki that day. Then her 5-year-old son spoke up.
Have you seen Vicki?
He said Vicki had stopped by earlier looking for Jennifer.
Hey, is Jennifer home?
After he told her she wasn't home, Vicki rode off toward her house, apparently having already mailed the card.
Did you see her by the bike path?
As the little boy finished his story, 2 older boys approached the deputy. They said they'd also seen Vicki riding away from the convenience store. Just minutes before they rode past her, they saw a small black car with California plates. It was moving so slowly they passed it on their bikes. They said it was heading in Vicki's direction, but they didn't wait to see if it passed her. And they never noticed the driver. A slow-moving out-of-state car, appearing at around the same time Vicki vanished, struck the investigators as suspicious. Although it simply may have been someone's guest looking for a house number, the sheriff had to consider the possibility that the little girl could have been abducted. Authorities take a case like this very seriously. They've learned to expect and brace for the worst. The sheriff called in homicide detective Gary Damers.
The sheriff decided that it was important to have the homicide detail handle this particular case because of the disappearance of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. It was felt that she had been abducted and that we were looking at a case that could eventually become a homicide case. So we were called out a little earlier than usual.
A few hours later, a command center was set up at the nearby elementary school, which was closed for the day. It became the clearinghouse for any information, any leads. As word of Vicki's disappearance spread, there was no trouble finding volunteers to man the phones.
That's correct.
The calls poured in.
Along with that, we would like to get some amplified.
Sheriff's deputies, along with hundreds of volunteers, organized a search of the area. They systematically moved out in concentric circles from Vicki's last known sighting. They combed the fields for some sign of the girl. But none was found. Even the dogs couldn't pick up her scent.
You know, before you know it, the minutes turned into half hour into hour, and more law enforcement, more deputies started coming. People within the neighborhood started coming over, and everybody started looking for Vicki.
A deputy remained at the house should new information come available or a ransom call be made. Hours passed with no word. The only calls were from concerned friends and family.
No, they don't know.
In terms of news, there was still nothing.
Okay,
Still,
thank you.
no Vicky. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was empowered to ask the FBI to enter the case. On day 2 of Vicky's disappearance, Special Agent Larry Bagley from the FBI's Tucson field office took the assignment.
The evidence was simply that a young child who was very responsible left home, and her bicycle is found in the middle of the street, and she never returned home. And that was enough to trigger our entry under the kidnapping statute.
In the case of a missing child, chances for a safe return increase when immediate action is taken. The FBI had the power to extend the investigation beyond the state of Arizona if necessary. The agent's participation gave Debbie Carlson hope for a quick resolution. A few blocks away at the command center in the elementary school, deputies and volunteers continued to work the phones. By now, it seemed that all of Tucson knew about the disappearance of the 4-foot-tall, 60-pound girl with auburn hair. And it seemed like everyone was calling.
Okay, thank you.
Some were pranksters, some merely misinformed. All had to be answered, filtered, and processed. Finally, among the dozens of hopeful but futile tips and leads, one call held a glimmer of hope. A woman called to report that she thought she saw Vicki Lynn Hoskinson at the mall the previous evening.
Hi, can I please
She was a
speak to
clerk at a
detective?
toy store.
No, I
She
want
told
this.
authorities that a woman in a wide-brimmed hat came in with an upset little girl who looked like Vicki Lynn to her. The woman tried to placate the child with a toy. She paid cash for the purchase, pulling it out of an envelope. The clerk also noticed that she carried a shopping bag from another store in the mall. After paying, the two left, arguing over what to have for dinner. The clerk agreed to come to the command center to provide a sketch. From her description, a police artist created a composite drawing of the customer.
What about her nose?
It was their first real lead. From the way the woman was described treating the girl, investigators believe she may have lost a child and was trying desperately to replace it with someone else's. While it was reassuring to think that Vicki was being cared for by her abductor, the theory had some nagging inconsistencies for Agent Bagley.
It was pretty unlikely to me that someone would have taken Vicki Lynn and then taken her to a public place and to be seen with her. That and the fact that Debbie said that Vicki Lynn would never knowingly accompany a stranger in public and not try to get away.
But perhaps Vicki did not run from the woman because she was not a stranger to the child. Investigators returned to Vicki's neighborhood, hoping that someone would recognize the sketch and provide a name.
Give me a call. I sure will.
They found no one who could.
Sure will. Yeah, thank you. You guys have a good day.
A number of leads that identified, or people believe they identified this woman, were telephoned into the command post, and each one of those leads were followed up by an investigator or a detective.
Ma'am? Excuse me.
Investigators canvassed the mall, including the store
FBI
whose
agent
shopping
Bagley.
bag the woman had carried.
This is Officer Nolan from the Sheriff's Department.
look at this sketch.
The clerk there
I didn't
recognized the
believe it was
woman,
in
remembering that a little girl
here.
was with
Little
her,
girl.
and even commenting that the woman had worn a wide-brimmed hat which wasn't included in the sketch. As new witnesses came forward, all of Tucson held its breath with the hope that Vicki Lynn Hoskinson would be found alive. By the second day of the search for 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, the news coverage was extensive. Local and national news teams broadcast hourly updates. Though Vicki was reportedly seen in the Tucson Mall the night before, arguing with a strange woman, it seemed implausible to agents and deputies that if Vicki were still alive, her abductor would have taken her to a public place. Investigators continued to search in nearby rural areas. They also continued to prepare themselves and Vicki's mother, Debbie Carlson, for the worst.
I remember them coming in and the second day on Tuesday and wanting access to Vicki's room. You know, they made us close up her room and they started taking hair samples from her bed. They took her sheets, they took her pillow, they took her hairbrush. They took all these things and I was like, you know, they were preparing a homicide case is basically was what they were doing. And I was not real receptive to that, you know, because in my mind, this was not going to be a homicide case.
Despite their doubts, investigators continued to pursue their only lead. They needed to identify the woman in the mall whom a witness believed had abducted Vicki.
We're gonna go get something to eat.
At the nearby high school, a student thought he recognized the woman's face. He said he saw the woman with the little girl in a dark-colored car the previous afternoon. He recalled the car was a black Monte Carlo. A little girl who resembled Vicki was looking out of the window. He believed that the woman driving was the same one depicted in the sketch. Investigators wondered if it was the same car seen earlier in the neighborhood by the two boys on the bikes.
Okay.
The Monte Carlo that was seen was a lead for us because it sounded like it had a great deal of potential, but there wasn't much we could do with it. We did look for Monte Carlos and had got no hits with that.
At the command center, witnesses of all ages were coming forward. A mother came in with her 3-year-old.
Couldn't have been more.
She helped her son describe to investigators what he had seen the day before. They lived across the street from where Vicki Lynn's bike was found. Earlier that afternoon, she told the detective her son was playing in the front yard. While she went into the house for just a moment, the boy said he saw a little girl on a pink bike being knocked down by what he called a black race car. He said a big girl with long hair got out of the car and helped the little girl in. Then they drove off. This little boy had apparently witnessed the abduction of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. His portrayal of events rekindled suspicions that Vicki may have been abducted by the woman from the mall. But he was too young to give any more useful details. And his mother hadn't seen or heard anything. Agents checked the spot where Vicki Lynn's bike had been found to see if anything had been overlooked. Agent Bagley made a crucial find. something that hadn't been reported earlier.
There was a fresh gouge on the post about 16 or 18 inches above the ground, which was not the contact point for a large car. So it looked to me like it was fresh. It certainly appeared to me that perhaps the car that had hit the bicycle had run into this post.
He surmised that the small black car with California plates spotted just yards away could have been the car that struck the post at that height.
There's no evidence of
The agent asked if any other investigators had received reports of a black out-of-state car in the area.
witnesses. I interviewed 2 young boys.
One detective had. Earlier that day, he had taken a statement from Sam Hall, the coach at the elementary school. Hall reported seeing a suspicious vehicle at the schoolyard at about 3 o'clock on September 17th, just 20 minutes before Vicky was last seen in the neighborhood. He said he first noticed a low black car with California tags, driving slowly near the schoolyard. Then he noticed that the driver was watching the children at play. He described the driver as male, with long hair and a beard. Hall told Detective Damers that when he looked at the stranger's face, a chill went up and down his spine.
He described it as his hair raising on the back of his neck when he saw this individual. So he kept a close eye on this subject.
As the man began to drive off, Hall had the presence of mind to jot down his license number. The next day, when the gym teacher had heard that Vicky Lynn Hoskinson was missing, he believed that his sighting might be relevant.
When we obtained the license number from Sam Hall and heard his story, it got me pretty excited because this was probably the break we were looking for.
It would take several hours for the FBI to trace the license number to the car's owner. Investigators were uncertain if there was any connection between the strange woman at the mall and the bearded man in the car.
Each investigator in this case was highly charged with emotion because every hour that passes makes the likelihood that Vicky Lynn would be recovered safely, it diminished with every hour.
Time conspired against them, and hope for Vicky Lynn's safe return began to falter as day 2 came to a close. September 19th, 1984. Day 3 in the hunt for Vicky Lynn Hoskinson. While the license plate for the small black car was being traced, investigators continued collecting statements from potential witnesses. Another neighborhood woman came in to describe how her child was almost abducted. The woman told investigators that she'd been doing laundry in her apartment building. While she was busy with the machine, a woman came in and tried to lure her child away. The mother managed to drive her off.
Sketch right here.
Police showed the witness their sketch of the woman from the shopping mall.
Was this the lady?
No.
Is that her?
The drawing did not look like the woman who grabbed her boy,
She was a little
but the mother couldn't be sure.
That's
Police canvassed the area and found the woman in question. She was a fixture in the neighborhood, eccentric but ultimately harmless.
Have you ever seen this child?
She was released. Another one of 200 or so dead ends that investigators pursued. Each one meant dashed hopes. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Carlson held a press conference with her family. She pleaded for Vicky's safe return. By reaching out to millions of people through the evening news, she hoped someone would come forward with information on her young daughter's whereabouts.
One minute I had hope they were going to find her, and the next minute I was waiting for them to walk through the door and tell me they found her body. And it was a roller coaster. It's like, am I going to be having a funeral in 3 days? Am I going to have my daughter in my arms in 3 days? Is she going to be one of those missing kids that is missing forever?
The FBI was inching closer to the answer. The trace on the license plate led to a 28-year-old Los Angeles man named Frank Jarvis Atwood. Agents gave the information to the FBI Identification Division to check for priors.
About 10 o'clock that evening, we received by fax a rap sheet from the Identification Division, and that about blew our mind because we noticed that there was a prior conviction for child molestation and another for kidnapping.
Frank Atwood was currently out on parole in California. Arizona FBI alerted agents there. They decided not to tell the Carlsons until they knew more. The following morning, day 4 in the case of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, agents went to the LA address where Atwood's vehicle was registered. It was the home of Atwood's parents, retired Army Brigadier General Frank Atwood Sr. and his wife.
Who's Atwood? Mr. Atwood, I'd like to ask you.
The Atwoods acknowledged that their son had committed crimes in the past. They also told investigators that he had visited a few days earlier, but they didn't know where he was now. Agents told them that he might be involved in the kidnapping of a child, and time was of the essence.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give you my business card.
Neither parent had any information to share.
Leave it right here on the table. If he does get in contact with either one of
Agents left their business cards in case the Atwoods learned anything new.
The mother was very protective of him, and the father listened to the pleas that perhaps if we acted soon enough, that perhaps Vicki Lynn might be recovered alive.
A few hours after the agents left, the Atwoods received a call.
Where are you? Mom?
It was their son, Frank. He needed their help. He said his car had broken down in Texas and he needed money wired to him so he could get it fixed.
Yeah.
His mother took down the address and told him not to worry. His father copied it and left the house.
I need to tell you that my son...
He went to a payphone and called the FBI.
At Chuck's garage.
He gave them the address of the garage in Kerrville, Texas, where his son Frank and a friend awaited money for a new transmission. The California office called agents in Arizona, who in turn called agents in Texas with a request to apprehend Frank Atwood. The Texas Bureau called the garage.
Yeah.
The manager confirmed that Atwood was there with one other man. He didn't see anyone else with them. He did not know if Atwood was armed. Agents asked him to stall the fugitive until an arrest team arrived. The wheels were set in motion for the arrest of Frank Atwood. There was one more call that Agent Bagley wasn't sure he should make.
The problem is whether or not to let the parents know that we have a good lead on this. It's breaking extremely fast. We're worried about whether Vicki Lynn is with him in that car, and all sorts of things go through your mind.
Ultimately, they decided to inform the Carlsons of this sudden turnabout in the case of their missing daughter. The story was too big to keep under wraps for much longer.
They came over before the arrest was made, and they briefed us that they were about to make an arrest in another state. And it was going to be on the TV, and basically they briefed us on the situation, who they were going to be arresting. There was no signs of Vicki. They had him under surveillance.
Without any idea about where the little girl might be, or even if she were still alive, federal agents moved in to arrest Frank Atwood for kidnapping.
Stay out here, sir.
4 days after Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared from Arizona, the FBI made an arrest in Kerrville, Texas. Frank Atwood and his traveling companion James McDonald were picked up without incident at an auto repair garage and held for suspected kidnapping. There was no sign of Vicki. Gary Damers of the Tucson Sheriff's Department headed to Texas to interrogate him.
He told us that he would speak to us about certain things, and there are certain things that he would not speak to us about. Some of the information that he provided was that he, in fact, was in the Tucson area.
On Romero Street.
Atwood's history of child molesting and kidnapping made him a likely suspect in the case. Atwood admitted to being in Vicki's neighborhood on Monday, September 17th, the day she disappeared. He said he'd been staying in a nearby park. At about 3 o'clock, he left to buy drugs and returned to the park 2 hours later, around 5 p.m. He wouldn't account for his whereabouts during those 2 lost hours. He claimed he was not responsible for Vicki's disappearance. James McDonald corroborated Atwood's story. On the day in question, he told investigators that he and Atwood had had an argument in the park at about 3 o'clock. Just after that, Atwood left in his car for about 2 hours. McDonald said that when Atwood returned around 5 o'clock, he had blood on his hands and clothing. Atwood told him he'd gotten into a fight with a drug dealer and stabbed him.
Get anything off him?
McDonald also gave authorities the names of other people in Tucson that he and Atwood hung around with. Most were transients. Officially, focus shifted away from the mysterious woman at the mall and centered on Atwood. But Debbie Carlson didn't want to entirely give up on the mall lady theory.
At first, I really wanted to stick to that theory, that it was probably a woman possibly who'd lost a child, was trying to replace the child. And I think that's what kept me going that first week, was that possibly it was someone would be someone who would be taking care of her.
Though Mrs. Carlson held out hope, investigators were less optimistic about a happy ending.
When he was arrested and she wasn't with him, the reality really started to set in, that those last words, "I love you," were the last words I was going to hear my daughter say to me.
While the FBI scrambled for a warrant to search Atwood's car, agents and Arizona authorities returned to Tucson the next day to track down the other park dwellers mentioned by McDonald. Investigators found 2 men who said that Atwood had spent a few nights in their trailer. One of the men, known as Mad Dog, recalled seeing him there Monday night, the night of Vicky's disappearance. His story supported what Atwood's traveling companion Jim McDonald told the FBI.
McDonald said that he had observed Atwood on Monday afternoon with bloody clothes and blood on his knife and on his boots. Mad Dog said the same thing separately, that he had observed the same thing at his trailer and that they had even discussed that Atwood should get rid of his bloody clothes and the knife.
Agents presented a warrant and searched the trailer for any evidence that might suggest kidnapping or murder. Initially, it looked as if the search proved fruitful. They collected a blanket that appeared to be blood-stained, along with a hairbrush believed to be Atwood's. Both were subjected to a battery of blood and fiber tests. Both revealed nothing. Atwood's clothes and knife were never found. The search continued, both for evidence against Atwood and for some trace of the victim.
FBI agents and detectives, including myself, continued to search for Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. There was a certain amount of frustration that had set in because we were unable to locate her. The area is vast. It's a lot of desert, and trying to use all the investigative skills available, we had been unable to locate her. But we continued to pursue any type of lead.
Though clues to Vicky's whereabouts were scarce, detectives continued to canvass the park where Atwood had spent most of his time while in Tucson. Agents found a couple who knew Frank Atwood. They also claimed to have seen the suspect in blood-stained clothes the day Vicki disappeared. Like the others, Atwood told them that he had stabbed a double-crossing drug dealer. While that was certainly possible, the timing of the knifing, exactly at the time of Vicki's disappearance, seemed to stretch coincidence. Though investigators now had corroborating stories that suggested Atwood's guilt, they still had no physical evidence and no body. To prove that Vicki had been in his car, they needed to match some hair or fiber from the car with ones collected from the victim's bedroom. It didn't turn out that way.
We didn't get a hair or fibers or blood that we could identify. During that time, and even at this time, the best forensic experts in the country were at the FBI, and they were the ones that processed the vehicle. So I truly believe that if there was something in there that could have been found, it would have been found.
What agents were looking for wasn't inside the car, but rather outside it. FBI examiners lifted a sample of paint from Vicki's bike to compare to a speck of pink paint found on Atwood's front bumper. The paint speck, just a few millimeters wide, was tested at the FBI's Materials Analysis Unit. The examiner first assigned the case passed away shortly after completing the tests. Former Special Agent Examiner James Corby would re-examine the minute evidence.
Usually, the victim of a crime, you have no association with the victim or the family, and we work so many of those cases that you try not to get involved, but it's very, very difficult when a crime involves a baby or a small child, somebody that's defenseless. And you find yourself, I think, working harder to try to establish something in the case. But if it's not there, I mean, it's not there. But you certainly, I think, take a more critical look at that case, and I think it's human nature.
In microscopic and chemical tests, Corby determined the bicycle's paint and the paint found on the bumper matched. Corby also found chrome plating from the bumper smeared on the bike.
So what we have here is an interchange of materials. The paint from the victim's bicycle was on the suspect's car. The plating from the suspect's car is on the victim's bicycle. And this interchange of materials establishes contact between the bicycle and the suspect's vehicle.
It was good, but without a body, it would not be enough to charge Frank Atwood Jr. with the murder of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. Authorities braced themselves for a difficult case with few witnesses, few visible clues, and no body. The case against Atwood could easily slip through any one of those cracks. Almost 3 weeks after little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared off a street in her Tucson neighborhood, Frank Atwood Jr. was arrested in Texas and charged with kidnapping. Vicki was still missing and presumed dead. Investigators knew that if her body was not recovered, prosecution for murder would be next to impossible. The Tucson community, living this nightmare day by day, soon learned that Atwood had slipped through the cracks before. Atwood was currently on parole after serving 3 years of a 5-year sentence after a child molestation charge involving a 7-year-old boy was plea bargained down to abduction. The enraged citizens of Tucson marched in the streets behind Vicki's family to protest lenient laws against convicted child molesters. Most wore yellow ribbons to show their faith in Vicki's safe return. Atwood fought extradition from Texas to Arizona. With no evidence that Vicki had been taken across state lines, the FBI dropped its federal charges against Frank Atwood. But state charges of kidnapping still held. In November, more than a month since Vicki's disappearance, Atwood returned to Arizona under heavy guard to stand trial for kidnapping. Bail was denied.
And I remember the day that they says, oh, you know, it will take probably at least 6 months. And I'm thinking, 6 months? Get out of here. You're crazy. Little did we know it was going to take almost 3 years.
On December 3rd, 1984, a clean-shaven Frank Jarvis Atwood Jr. pled not guilty at his arraignment. Due to publicity, the judge ordered Atwood's trial to be moved from Tucson to Phoenix. Jury selection would prove long and arduous, taking almost 6 weeks. But the case continued to unfold. On April 12, 1985, a woman walking her dog just off the main road found a small human skull in the desert northwest of Tucson.
We immediately cordoned off the area. The FBI was called in to assist. We systematically worked the area. What had happened was that the body had been scattered. The animals had actually gotten to it and had moved a number of parts around, and we just took our time. I think we were out there for 5 days collecting everything that we could possibly get out of that area.
About 100 people meticulously scoured a 20-square-mile stretch of desert. Investigators photographed the entire area to record the condition of the location. Forensic technicians marked areas where evidence was to be collected. In a case with so little physical evidence, overlooking the smallest bone fragment might prove costly. 12 hours a day for 5 days, authorities recovered and recorded bone fragments, their location, and their condition. Over 20 bags of evidence were delivered to the lab for identification in late May of 1985, including a portion of lower mandible that still held teeth. A witness came forward who testified to seeing Atwood arrive in the area with a child, then leave alone. The coroner found that weathering on the bones was consistent with 8 months' exposure to the elements. Dental records proved these were the remains of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson.
You know, they found the lower mandible and a gopher hole. 1 year later, one of the search and rescue people that searched for her remains had taken a bouquet of flowers and put it in that gopher hole where she found the lower mandible. Vicki Lynn affected a lot of people. These are people who never knew her as the vibrant tomboy little girl that we had. And I don't think anyone who lived here during that time will ever forget how this community came together because of her.
Vicki's family laid her to rest on May 30th, 1985. "500 mourners attended her funeral. The community was outraged that the life of one of its youngest members was cut so short. Debbie Carlson vowed that her daughter's death would have significance for the living.
I became very politically active to help fight for children's issues. And we got a couple laws changed in the state of Arizona. And I think that was my saving grace because it gave me some focus. It gave me a focus away from the pain and the gut wrench and the tearing at my heart that I felt every second to I was doing something positive for Vicki and for other kids. That my daughter was not going to die in vain. She was going to make a difference.
Frank Atwood was indicted for first-degree murder. On March 26, 1987, 2.5 years after Vicki disappeared, he was found guilty. Frank Atwood was sentenced to death. But a case like this is never truly over. 16 years later, memories of hope and despair still linger.
I'll never forget the sound of a helicopter. To this day, when I hear a helicopter, I remember those days. I remember the smell of the air, the time of the year, and the noise of a helicopter.